Hey there, internet friends, and welcome to That D Plus Show. Class is in session for the only show from that nerdy site that lets you know what kind of quality to expect right from the name. I'm your host, Trevor Starkey, and each week we dive into a different Disney Plus offering and discuss its history, how it holds up today, and our general impressions on the thing. This show is made possible entirely by the support of our patrons over at patreon.com/thatnerdysite, so if you like the show and you can support us over there, we would definitely appreciate it. But if you can't, no big deal. The fact that you're listening is awesome, and of course, we would love it if you like, subscribe, rate, review, share the podcast with your friends, all that fun stuff. Joining me today, we have Logan back on the show. How you doing, Logan?
I'm doing wonderful. How are you doing, Trev?
Doing all right. We had it's fun because when you pitched this as like the episode, I was like, we're just going complete extremes of like WandaVision last week with a 5-person show and like, you know, the hottest thing on Disney Plus to Jane, a film by Brett Morgan. Basically one of two documentaries on two National Geographic documentaries on Disney Plus about Jane Goodall. So I will throw it to you, Logan. Why did you pick Jane, a film by Brett Morgan?
So I wanted to do a movie whenever we were talking about what to do this week. And then I thought a documentary movie would be fun. I like to do eclectic ones when I come on, right? Like, not the first Pirates of the Caribbean movie, the second one.
Yeah.
And documentaries and all that kind of fun stuff. Shout out to Gordon Ramsay. And just kind of broaden the horizon of that is Disney Plus and kind of get into kind of some of the kookier, weirder things that they own, which is a lot at this point.
Yeah.
And so I always enjoy kind of digging into those things. Jane, the inspiration for that is really down to, I mean, obviously, as we've talked about before on various podcasts, I love, you know, animals, conservation, nature. And then Jane Goodall actually happens to be one of my girlfriend's, Shravia's, biggest personal heroes. She's a huge Jane Goodall fan. She, like, went to, as part of her undergrad program, actually like traveled to like the Galapagos Islands and like South America and all stuff and did like a bunch of like animal stuff out there, and was like heavily inspired by Jane Goodall and her work. And so I thought it'd be a nice little tip of the hat to that. And also because I also love animals, right? Like I frequently say that growing up, myself and one of my childhood best friends were each like profoundly impacted by Steve Irwin. And his shenanigans and antics out there.
Okay.
He had a life-size... This is a great story, actually. This is like... It's technically a tangent, but it's a great story. There was a cardboard cutout of Steve Irwin in his house. And originally it was in his bedroom. Eventually they put it in the guest bedroom at the new house they had. And the thing that's important to note about his guest bedroom is that it's weird as shit. I've never, and literally in all my life, ever seen a bedroom like it again. So it's like a regular bedroom kind of like square shape thing. And then basically there was like one long, like essentially a hallway, but it was just in the bedroom down to a window at the end that looked out on kind of to like the neighbor's house basically. But it's like a long, like 20-foot just like hall thing inside the guest bedroom. And they put Steve Irwin at the end of that thing. And I never stayed in the guest bedroom when we were like really little kids. We stayed together in the same bedroom. I just laid on the floor or whatever in the sleeping bag and it was fine. But eventually as we got older, if we had other friends also stay over, I would stay in the guest bedroom. And it was here that I first realized the horror of having a cardboard life-size cutout of a human being just silhouetted by the night sky.
Yeah.
Because I like turned off the lights, turned off the TV I was watching, like just like went down and like happened to glance down 20 feet down this weird hallway in the room, and just a person was there. So whenever I would stay the night and stay in the guest bedroom, I always just leave the TV on the whole time.
You didn't bother just moving the cardboard cutout or something like that. You were like, nope, turn it on the TV.
But no, that's a long way to say that we love Steve Irwin. We were each very much inspired by him and his just like larger than life persona and goofy personality and love of nature and animals. And I frequently say that if it wasn't for me and Brandon each liking just like one thing more than like animals and nature, in his case it's like mechanical engineering and like designing cars. In my case it was politics. And like writing and that stuff, we each probably would have gone down the same field as that. So that's another reason why I chose the Jane Goodall doc.
Interesting. And then so I mean, I'll just kind of jump in then, I guess. like I obviously have known the name Jane Goodall and stuff, but I really
Sure.
and I've known like associated with like her studies in the with like chimpanzees and monkeys and stuff. But I don't think I ever like knew it to this degree until really
I
sitting
didn't
down and
either.
watching this. So it was she's just always been one of those like characters of pop culture.
Yeah,
So
those
like
names
for
you
me,
just know. Yeah.
because obviously all this happened like 20 years before I was born, kind of stuff. So,
Yeah, more than that.
and well, yeah, it's like early 60s is when most of this takes place, kind of thing. So yeah, it was just kind of a like a fascinating to finally sit down. Even something like her kind of having this revelation that like the chimpanzees would come in like monkey or come in like bananas, and that was kind of like I was like, is that where like the trope of monkeys
I also
liking
had that
bananas
thought. I was
comes
like,
from?
oh shit, yeah.
Did that not exist before Jane Goodall? And I'm like,
1960.
seems entirely possible that is the case. So we have her to thank for banana peels being kind of Donkey Kong's main
I was gonna
attack
say.
in the Mario Kart series, I guess. But yeah, it was really cool kind of just filling in a lot of the gaps, especially as I kind of did a little bit of the extraneous research, as I am often do in this, especially for like documentaries where it's like there isn't like IMDb trivia to pull from. So it was, okay, let me go and look at like Jane Goodall's Wikipedia page and kind of like pull some interesting tidbits from her life. Even like before I started doing it, when I saw like the beginning of this documentary kind of come up of like the following footage was captured by Hugo Van Lueck, and was thought lost or whatever. I kind of paused and then I started like making some notes and stuff and seeing in like Wikipedia that like they were married. I was like, oh, that's a fun little trivia thing I'll put in there, not knowing that it was going to become like a main
A plot
point of
yeah.
the story kind of thing. But yeah, it was just kind of interesting getting this like glimpse into her life as well as like obviously her perspective from it. So let's dive into a little bit of the history lesson here. Originally released, I pulled IMDb had like 3 different dates. They had a ton of different dates, as many of their entries do. But I pulled 3 interesting ones because I imagine most people saw this when it debuted on TV, which was March 12th, 2018. But before that, it did run in theaters. It debuted at the Toronto International Film Festival, September 10th, 2017. And then it had a limited theatrical run, October 20th of 2017, in like New York, LA, and then, limited kind of around the country. So some comparable releases at the time. You had, in September of 2017, you had The Shape of Water out there on September 2nd, and Loving Vincent, September 22nd, 2017. I pulled those. I pulled like the Shape of Water one as like a fun little like, oh, it's another woman going and like living with the creatures kind of thing. And then Loving Vincent was just another indie kind of thing that I thought was an interesting pull there. October of 2017 gave us Ladybird, which was my favorite movie of that year. If I had actually seen it that year, but I didn't end up seeing it until like January of 2018. So Baby Driver took the prize, as you know, from having come out and watched it here. I, Tanya came out October 19th, and Geostorm came out October 20th. So, very fitting that Jane Goodall's documentary about preserving wildlife would go up against Geostorm. And then in March of 2018, you had Tomb Raider with Alicia Vikander, and Pacific Rim Uprising were a couple of the big movies that hit theaters that month. Has a runtime of about an hour and a half, about an hour and 30 minutes. And then in the National Geographic documentary films timeline of things, this is actually the second under their like formally established National Geographic documentary films branding. The first film was LA 92, which had come out April of 2017 and was about the 1992 LA riots. Then this, again, kind of like had a limited run release in October of 2017. And then Into the Okavango was the kind of next one down the line that came out April 22nd, 2018, about the Okavango Delta in Africa across Angola, Botswana, and Namibia. Then I didn't pull it in here, but I did see that the one that came right after that was certainly probably the one I recognize the name of most, i.e. Free Solo. So they had a good little run there of early documentaries. Roll call. So the director and technically writer, but I always think writers on documentaries is a weird thing. But Brett Morgan here, who had done a handful of other documentary projects prior to this, including a 30 for 30 episode about the day O.J. Simpson was arrested. And basically,
it's very good.
I pulled that in because I imagined you had seen that one, given that you are much more of a sports fan than I am. But I was like, oh, that's
Bill
cool.
Simon's 30 for 30 specials are fantastic, that first run.
Mm-hmm. And then he also did, shortly before this, I believe, a documentary about Kurt Cobain called Cobain Montage of Heck. Was his. And then this was the thing that actually like jumped out the most at me is in the time since Jane came out, he also directed like an episode of Runaways, which is a Marvel Hulu show. So I was like, that's weird. Like it's weird to see weird to see a documentary guy go from that to like full on Marvel pseudo cinematic universe. Anyway, and then of course, kind of the two main subjects of the documentary here are Jane Goodall, who is a subject of more than 40 films according to her Wikipedia page, including as we kind of debated back and forth a little bit beforehand, including a second one on Disney Plus called Jane that came out last year. Called what is it? Jane
Goodall.
Jane Goodall.
Power of Hope.
The Hope. Came out last year. So yeah, it's like you were like, let's watch the Jane Goodall documentary, and I go and search it, and I'm like, which one? And then Hugo Van Lueck has 14 cinematographer credits on IMDb, including many as kind of referenced throughout this piece involving the Serengeti. A little bit of trivia here. Again, kind of pulling all this just from Goodall's life in general. But Hugo was a baron. It's not really like you can see it in like some of the headlines and stuff that kind of flash, but that basically made Jane Goodall a baroness when they were married. She obtained her PhD in ethology from Newnham College, basically the Women's College of Cambridge, completing her thesis in 1965. Because that was one of the things that I was curious about as we're watching this thing, and they make a big point that she had like no formal training going into this, but then eventually people are talking to her and she's being referred to as Dr. Jane Goodall, and I'm like, yeah, when did that happen? She got her thesis in 1965, becoming only the 8th person at Cambridge allowed to study for a PhD without first having obtained a Bachelor of Arts or a Bachelor of Science. Thought that was pretty cool.
That's very cool, yeah.
She was named Dame Commander of the Most Excellent Order of the British Empire in an investiture held at Buckingham Palace in 2004. So much like, who was it before that we did this on? Oh, Gordon Ramsay. So much like it's Sir Gordon Ramsay, it's also Dame Jane Goodall. In April 2002, the UN Secretary General Kofi Annan named Goodall a UN Messenger of Peace. And lastly, tying it into kind of the whole Disney side of things, Goodall is honored with a plaque on the Tree of Life at Walt Disney World's Animal Kingdom, as she was an instrumental consultant in the development of the park and its conservation efforts. See also the Hit or Miss episode of the Imagineering story, where she kind of makes an appearance and is involved in that documentary series on Disney Plus. And I like that was probably like the first time I'd really seen her talking at length, at least in conscious memory. Was when she popped up in the like, hey, we're going to talk about the Animal Kingdom park in the Imagineering store. I was like, oh, that's cool. So I was like, oh yeah, that I can loop it back around to that. So yeah, what did we think of the documentary, Logan? I'll throw it to you first. What did you think of Jane?
Yeah, I have lots of notes I took. The big one I kind of want to jump into first, just from a documentary filmmaking perspective, is the way the film is structured and paced. Is a very slow film. It gives you lots of just quiet shots of stuff happening. And I think, like I wrote it down. I think I wrote down like very slow, chill start. Like the first 6 minutes is like not a lot happening, and it's just setting you into this world. And I think after that, you pretty much understand like this is the kind of like pace and vibe of the movie. that I think by the end I really liked. It is kind of just a slower, like calm documentary. Yeah, I mean, I think an easy comparison to make is the Mr. Rogers documentary that came out in 2017 or 18.
Okay.
I don't know if you've seen that either.
Yep.
Won't You Be My Neighbor? But yeah, it's incredible. It's not as good as that, I think, but that's a really well crafted documentary. But it's very good, I think. In particular, like the Rogers documentary, I think it's very good at highlighting the person as a person. I think in particular the fact that it goes over roughly basically like a decade, 15-year period in Jane Goodall's kind of career from like when she first gets there to just after kind of the war really is like the main bulk of it. And in particular kind of covers the arc of Flo and Flint's life, the two chimpanzees. Obviously they talked about like Flint was pretty much not designed, I guess, but was the idea was to be the first ever chimp they covered from birth to death.
Yeah.
And technically, I suppose they did that, but it was much shorter and kind of sadder in regards to that, and kind of what happened to the community of chimpanzees after Flo's death and the fracturing and the 4-year war that followed. I think the fact that that's kind of the climax and then it kind of comes down from there and we kind of have everything wrap up. In essence, there's only like probably like 10 minutes left of the movie after the war. I think is very much like the Mr. Rogers movie. Anyone who has seen it or hasn't seen it, where it very much gets kind of the dark part, and then it kind of wraps up at the end, kind of traces his doubts and her own doubts in this movie. I thought was really brilliant, really smart, obviously, because she, in 2021 is, I mean, almost literally 60 years now of studying the chimpanzee community out there. It is. I also did quite a bit of research on Wikipedia reading, like the longest continuously observed like animal community in history.
Yep.
And I think to get like kind of that first like 10 to 15 year period of it, where she seems kind of the most involved, and as she has to kind of balance her marriage and raising a son, and then kind of those things each splintering as well. In some ways, I thought was really, really a smart decision to make it kind of a more focused film.
Yeah, it was. I mean, one of my first notes that I took, kind of to your first point there of like this is a very slow paced and chill thing, was lots of Jane looking through binoculars shots for like the first 10, 15 minutes. It's just like that, and there was a part of me that before they get into the fact that this is that Hugo had kind of come out there as part of like the second round of funding or whatever. Like I was watching the first chunk of it being like, if she's out there all alone, like what is this footage from? And there was like enough of the footage that was just kind of like what I would imagine like is a documentarian getting like quote candid footage of like his partner, that it felt like almost voyeuristic in that like I was just watching like moments of their life together. And then obviously like it becomes very apparent that like, oh, that is what you've been watching. You've been watching kind of the like footage that would come from when he came into the picture,
which I thought was really smart. The way that they like did that though. Yeah,
and then like pieced all of that together, but like showing it in the context of like, oh, this is what her early days were before she was making these discoveries. It was just her going out here and like because there was definitely a lot of moments where I was just like, there's like this weird. It's definitely the kind of thing I would expect from like a modern documentary where it is like the documentarian runs up ahead, sets up a shot, and then you see like the subject kind of like making the entrance in a pseudo staged but also very natural kind of fashion. And so like realizing that this is from the early 60s, it was fascinating to just the idea that they had all of this footage that they could piece together in this way. And it was fascinating kind of seeing the kind of the little placards that come up right at the top talking about how this is using hundreds of hours of footage that basically Hugo had shot that was previously lost but got rediscovered back in 2014. And part of me is like, so is it just like sitting in a vault in National Geographic somewhere? Because there's also
Maybe.
like, that's even another thing.
Or in
that-
his like vault somewhere, like his like stockpile somewhere. Yeah.
Yeah. Because there's like even another element there that creeped in at some point of like, this is well before, the digital age where you could just kind of like back up stuff on SD cards or whatever. So like, I'm even thinking of just like the logistical like feat of bringing film in and out and like getting it packaged or shipped back to, London or New York or wherever it was going. And so, yeah, there was just an element of that that like thinking of like a documentary made in the 60s versus a documentary made now. There was a lot of like, oh, that's like interesting kind of thought experiment going on in my head. But yeah, I thought it was very interesting. The one thing that like jumped out at me in terms of like this is very clearly a choice they made was the idea that anytime like the chimpanzees get really aggressive, the whole thing goes into grayscale, and it's like we don't want to show you that like it's maybe it's too violent for the little ones or something like that, so we're going to tone it down by making it like black and white kind of thing, because you see it when they go wild kind of early on, and they end up having to set up like the feeding station to kind of like ease the chimps, and then you see it again in the war that you kind of allude to later on. It was like when, because that had been established at the beginning of the documentary, when we get to like after Flo passes and the other like the tribe splinters basically, and some of them move south and it goes into grayscale, I was like, oh, something's about to go down. And sure enough, like, yep, everyone, what was it? I pulled in the quote, the entire community that moved south was annihilated. It's like, oh damn, that's it was a very fascinating story.
It's one for me where, so I actually really like the grayscale decision. Even I think it's less.
Oh yeah, like it's not that I it's not that I like didn't like it or whatever. It's just like that was the thing that I thought was like most, apart from like editing the story together, that was like the visual choice that
creative
was made.
decision.
Yeah.
I viewed it too less from a like we have to like shield the children, and more from like, because this is just like everything is it's a little bit like the moment in Knives Out where it goes from like a steady cam to this like a handheld thing, like just like everything's kind of been like rocked off its tilt a little bit, and like because it is almost like this primal like thing, like all the color gets drained out of it kind of thing. It's like this moment of like frenzy. I think the story is really, really well told. I mean, I think it's a clever documentary because you don't really know what it's about until probably like 25, 30 minutes in, when it becomes clear that like this is, and arguably not until the very end of the movie where you go, this is really the story of Jane, Flo, and Flint, and like that kind of three-person thing. Mm-hmm. And then also arguably Hugo and her son, and kind of like the parallel dynamics between those two characters in terms of her relationship with him and her relationship with Flo and Flint. And all of them kind of come in, with the exception of her son, I suppose, but all of them come in kind of to an end at like right around the same time. Mm-hmm. I thought it was like really clever storytelling, a really clever like filmmaking. I think, and Jane kind of alludes to this where she talks about how like chimps she thought were like human but better. Mm-hmm. And it took, these two kind of traumatic events in Flo dying, and I love the I don't know how they got it, but like the fact that they had the footage of her right next to Flo's body at the river was incredible footage. And I think that, and then obviously Flint too, and Flint's kind of tragedy, and again getting that footage, and then the way that the tribe kind of, really does just splinter apart, and this kind of destruction and this rampage, and she has to kind of reconcile the fact that like they are more like people than we thought, in both really great and incredible, like groundbreaking, thought-provoking ways, and also in the darker ways that you wouldn't have imagined or hoped for. The fact they do, wage a genuine war, for lack of a better word, right? They do kind of, their ability to use tools kind of takes on a darker edge, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this all kind of being discovered and realized for the first time, I thought was really, really, again, so much of me throughout the film was just like, this is incredible footage. This truly is just wild. I love the story of her and Greybeard. He easily became my favorite chimp. I just loved his whole vibe and dynamic. Him just lazily sticking the stick into the termite mound, just ripping it off, and Jane in the back of me that's the most groundbreaking discovery. We have to redefine what it means to be a human being, and him just being these are some dope termites, just very lazily ripping them off.
Yeah,
it was a great juxtaposition.
Yeah, I definitely like that, and to kind of the point I made about the animal kingdom and her kind of being honored there. I believe it is alongside a sketch or a carving or something of David Greybeard as well. I saw her favorite,
a sculpture.
Yeah,
the first one.
Yeah. That was definitely interesting seeing kind of the characters that she created that she created a narrative and a story around this. There is an element of it that I found myself thinking a lot well, yeah, she's very clearly not scientific kind of or she doesn't have the scientific background, because there's the whole philosophy of observe but do not interfere kind of thing, and that just gets completely blown out.
She directly addresses it.
Yeah, she's dealing with that so head on, that if anybody else in there would, I imagine prolonged scientific study of these the chimpanzees would still come to a lot of the same kind of conclusions, but there's also an element of it that is, she went in kind of wanting to humanize this, and there's I feel like there's an element that also gets kind of touched on and addressed, that she was out there alone, so she was looking for companionship and kind of a sense of community, and so she creates this community in these animals around her, that they have obviously their own kind of hierarchy among their kind of community, but the fact that it was almost anthropomorphizing this story, that I feel like you could see anybody else going in there and creating a different narrative around some of these beats almost. And I think that is most prevalent in her kind of observations on Flo, because for me, very much the documentary turns into Jane's relationship with Flo helps. She, I think, touches on the idea that her studying Flo made her a better mother, and it also made her appreciate Flo more and what Flo was going through when she became a mother. There was a very cyclical nature and relationship to when Grub was born, basically, because she immediately starts viewing that through a lens that she wouldn't have necessarily had if she'd never gone to Gombe. That there's, obviously the fact that the kid is nicknamed Grub is I feel like that kid probably also had a whole bunch of weird things growing up, that he would not have had if his mother had not been Jane Goodall, lives with chimpanzees kind of thing.
I did to that point love the back and forth where she's talking about Grub, and the producer, whoever, comes over and goes did and she was he had to spend all the time out in the wild, and we, in the early part of the day, I was out in the field doing administrative work, and then I was out with the monkeys for an hour or two, and the afternoon was just with him, and we'd be hang out with other animals, and I tried to introduce him to this stuff and explore kind of the world. And there's a great shot of him, Jane, and holding Grub, and a chimp probably 5 feet away, basically. Mm-hmm. And then the producer overhead goes, "Did he like chimps?" And she goes, "No, he hated him." Without missing a beat, without a moment's hesitation, he always hated them. Yeah. I thought it was a great line. To me, you touched on a few different points that I kind of want to go to, but the big one is, obviously when the kind of the epidemic ripples through the community, And Jane kind of gives that very much, I think, thesis of her entire view of human-animal relationships, which is the fact that, like, and I quote it here where it's like, I see no difference between helping a human and helping an animal. None at all. I would help them just as readily as I would help you. And I think that that's kind of the point, is that I think, and another big part of Jane's study is, like, she was kind of the first one that gave names to the animals and not numbers. Because before that, they always were just given numbers and not names. And she rejected that kind of idea, rejected that theory, and did something different, right? And I think she viewed this much more as a, like, kind of symbiotic relationship, right? She didn't view it as kind of, I think, detached as, as the priest kind of says, like, survival of the fittest, right? Like, that's just what happens. If they die kind of thing. And she said, if I can help this creature, I will. I won't hesitate to do that. This life can be saved, and we should try to save it, right? And I think you saw the repercussion when they did have to kill McGregor.
Yeah.
And how, this is probably 50 years removed from when that happened, and she still very visibly was upset, I think, by the fact that they had to put that chimp down 50 plus years ago. It did not sit easy with her, I think, all that kind of time later. And I think part is the fact that, like, to this day in 2021, Jane Goodall is still the only person to ever be accepted into a chimpanzee, like, community, and no one else in history has been, even still. And I think that dynamic, that personal relationship that she had for the few years she was there and in the community like that, that is going to impact you, that's going to influence you. I think it's going to change how you view both the larger world, and also changes how you view, obviously, the chimps and nature itself, but also change how I think you view people, right? And they kind of touch on that where she sent off the letter about David Graeber using tools. And again, it was probably my favorite, like, tell her again back, where Lika was like, we're gonna have to either change the definition of tools or change the definition of man.
Yeah. I was like, that's a weird, but like also putting it in the context of the time where, yeah, like, man was defined by,
literally,
like,
was the definition. Yeah, they had, like, a great screenshot of it. Yeah,
we can use tools that the rest of the species on this planet cannot.
I think it was a great visual imagery of just how groundbreaking her work was. Like, it literally redefined what it means to be a person, just as much as it, like, blasted open all the doors in terms of, like, what animals are capable of, like, thinking and doing.
Yeah, and I like how she even, like, kind of calls back to that a little bit at the end of the documentary, when she's talking about kind of like, the real thing that makes us human is the fact that we've created language that can outlive us, and that can like, we can carry on and pass information down from generation to generation, so we can ask ourselves those big questions of, like, why are we here, what do we do, kind of, what is our purpose, and kind of, because we have that, it is our responsibility to look out for the rest of the planet's creatures, even though, far too often we do not. I thought that was an interesting kind of evolution of man knows how to use tools versus now in 2017, when this was kind of coming out, like, what makes man is kind of like our knowledge and our ability to communicate those big ideas with one another that presumably, obviously, we think does not necessarily get communicated or is more instinctual in animals. I thought that was an interesting kind of, like, almost closing the loop on that.
Yeah.
But even on the, like, when that discovery is made, there was like a twofold kind of interesting split almost, in that, like, obviously the scientific community squashes her ideas and kind of has this like backlash towards her, because of her lack of education, because she's a woman in the 60s, kind of making these kind of not proliferations, whatever, proclamations, and at the same time, like, there was an element like when like the first images kind of come up and you see like young Jane Goodall. I'm like, oh, like young Jane Goodall was like an attractive young woman, and that the fact that plays into like why, you know, she was kind of taken a little more seriously was that like people were like, you know, she's you know, like male no more kind of thing, and science is all about, you know, this beautiful blonde woman that's coming out here and living with the chimps and stuff like that, and because she was able to kind of use that perception of her beauty and people paying more attention to what she was saying because of her looks. I love that she kind of is like, yeah, I mean, so what? They were listening to the message. That's fine. I don't care necessarily. I thought that was an interesting kind of like, yes, almost like dichotomy to like the response of Jane's kind of initial findings or early findings.
I think you see it too in what I would argue she probably thinks is one of her biggest legacies, which is that the study of primates is a field that is almost exactly gender neutral in terms of the number of women and men that kind of research it and study it, which is, I would argue, pretty strongly attested to both her influence and kind of legacy, but also her direct influence in inspiring multiple generations at this point of female, you know, scientists and researchers to get in the field and to work at her camp out there, as she kind of handed off the reins to the students. And we see some images of them all kind of goofing off well.
I mean, even like early on when she's kind of like doing almost like media tours or whatever, you see like footage of like her signing autographs for little girls and stuff like that. And that was like a really cool little thing.
I mean, to take it back to her personal, again, like that, I can't imagine, you know, it's so weird in a very like genuine way to like, because obviously, me and Trevor are two, you know, white straight men. There's a lot of representation. So it's like, it's always that weird thing of being like, to almost like remove something like, what is it like to just not have an example of pretty much everything? You know what I mean? And even like outside of like Steve Irwin, there are lots of like male animal people, right? But for like Shrav, for example, who was grown up and I mean still now as a 26-year-old just loves and deeply respects and admires Jane Goodall and her work and literally traveled the world to do similar stuff like her. I can't imagine, you know, as like a 5 or 6-year-old thumbing through books and seeing some, you know, 50-something British lady in like the 80s or 90s, you know, out in Africa studying with the chimpanzees, being like, oh, like this is a thing that like is a thing that like I can do. I have that visual example, right? Like it is yet another reminder of like, not just the representation matter, but like it can dramatically lead to an actual gender neutral field, as opposed to so many other cases where that is not the case, where it is predominated by one sex, almost always male. And so it's really cool to see both her legacy in terms of that and also her like directly involved being like, no, I'm going to make sure there are women out here doing this as well, is another really cool, I think, legacy of Jane's work as well.
Yeah, I think that was one of the things that I would have liked to have seen a little bit more was the thing that's kind of like hinted at in those like last 10 minutes is the fact that she became such an activist in this field, is very much kind of it's wrapped up. It's alluded to the idea that she hasn't stayed in any one place for more than 3 weeks since 86 or something like that. I also immediately was thinking, I wonder if that like maintained true for this last year when pretty much the entire world has been in lockdown and quarantine and stuff, or if she did actually kind of have to start.
She's 86 years old. She probably yeah.
I mean, maybe, but she also seems like the kind of person. I mean, she touches on there like, you know, I don't want to go out like McGregor, basically. So,
yeah.
You know, if she could be active, I'm sure she was probably still trying to be active. But again, I have not been keeping up with.
I just mean more because she's
Jane
high
Goodall's
risk because of her age.
I mean, absolutely. But like, I think, you know, she could still be going out there and doing these things that she's been doing in isolation with people as she had, you know, for years and years. Yeah. But yeah, it was definitely one of those things of like, it almost made me want to hop into the the 2020 documentary to see if like
Second
that
Operator.
one examines more of her life as an
activist
activist,
side,
kind of
yeah.
in the
I imagine
yeah. It'd be-
this one is such a like first like 15 years for work kind
Mm-hmm.
of focused film.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very fascinating thing to be able to like hear 55 years removed, be able to like piece together footage like that alongside like an interview. I mean, there's definitely one of the big elements of this also felt like, and I guess maybe this falls into like why it is a written by documentary, is that there's like a ton of her voiceover that seems like she's pulling from like existing writings that she's already done. Like
I mean, she's got
there's
multiple novels. I think.
exactly there's like a lot of moments where she's speaking with such like clarity and insight that it just doesn't feel like it's off the cuff talking to an interviewer. It feels like she's reading excerpts from books or something like that that she has written. That was definitely something that like stood out to me as, almost not jarring, but like certainly disparate enough from the conversational nature that you see in kind of those talking head moments with the interviewer, versus a lot of those kind of like big idea moments that she's kind of like talking through this stuff and what this means for humanity as a whole. Those kinds of moments where she is touching on those like big ideas feel like big ideas that she's been talking about and writing about for 40 years, more so than like just having a conversation with a guy who's answering his questions. Any other moments or anything you want to highlight? Give some shout outs to.
Give some shout outs to. I mean, just like David Greybeard in general. I mean, like I get it. Like I love that guy. The image of him like being the one who obviously was most comfortable with Jane because he was the one who had like let her in the camp to begin with. Being the one who also then went into her camp first and like just like took the bananas and was like, oh shit, I'm on like that great image to have him just like walking up and just like grabbing the bananas and like scurrying away before it just like descended into absolute chaos over the next few weeks and months. It was a really cute, fun image, I think.
Yeah, the whole not only because like obviously I think the first one I think that you're talking about is like they left bananas out and he came and got them, but what really grabbed me was her standing there kind of like hiding her face but holding out the bananas and like trying to hide her face so that like she's not coming across as aggressive or whatever. And the first time you see that image, like a couple of chimps kind of like approach, but they grab like the bananas that are on the ground, and it's like, oh, okay, they're not that close where they're going to. And then like you cut back to it and like one of them does grab the bananas like right out of her hand. And it was like, that's a really like that showed more than really probably any other moment, like how really ingrained she was with them and how like there was kind of that community relationship. I guess that and like moments where like they're picking stuff out of her hair and she's picking stuff out of theirs and stuff like that. I guess that was another one. Obviously, since like grooming was such an integral part of kind of their community. But yeah, that moment where like the chimp actually takes the bananas out of her hands was one I almost wasn't expecting. I was expecting it to be like I guess that I was expecting there to be still some sort of barrier there where there was still going to be some resistance. And the fact that there wasn't was really cool.
Yeah, agreed.
Anything else, or are we good to move on and grade it?
We can grade it.
All right. So grading from A+ to F, where do you put Jane?
I'm gonna give it an A. I think it set out what it sought to do, to capture this kind of like slice and peek into this specific period of time in her life, and I think it did it very well. I like the few kind of creative decisions it went with, and I think it's just a really fascinating story.
Yeah, I think I'll echo that. There was a good chunk where because it was so slow, I remember checking a couple times like how much
The
longer.
beginning's definitely the slowest, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, I paused a couple times throughout and was like, how much longer is there in this? And it was like 45 minutes and then still like 30 minutes to go or whatever. And so for a while there, I was like, I don't know if this is for me. But when she does kind of start really tying together how her relationship with the chimpanzees really like was integral in impacting her relationship with her own family, both with Hugo as well as Grub. I thought that was like, okay, this is tying it all together. I understand the point of this documentary now, and I understand the story that's being told is the thing she mentions that you kind of mentioned earlier of like, she thought they were better than us. She thought they were like humans but better, and then discovers, oh no, they're not. But there's still a lot to be learned from them. Yeah. I thought that was a very interesting thesis that she kind of like ends up landing on, and I think presents out. I mean, so much so that it pretty much got her PhD. So very cool. So yeah, I give it an A as well. A little. Oh yeah, go ahead.
I did just forget because I'd forgotten until you kind of referenced it again. Just the idea going back to like the very end of the film and her kind of emphasis on like what sets us apart, what makes us people is language, our ability to kind of communicate with one another. It goes back kind of that general idea of like, they're not able to kind of learn and pass down like mistakes learned or lessons learned over time. And again, it goes back to, I think, that kind of theme you hear a lot people talk about of like, to tell stories is to be human kind of thing. And that being like such a fundamental part. And I feel like Jane would be someone who would very much agree that like to tell stories is to be human, because it is how we transmitted all of our history for the majority of our history, was through oral kind of traditions and oral stories.
Yeah.
And so I thought that as well.
Yeah. Extra credit, other suggestions from Disney Plus if you like Jane.
We've done one of them already. We're getting an A+ on this.
We have indeed. You have Jane Goodall, The Hope, which is the other Jane Goodall documentary that we mentioned. Kingdom of the Apes, Battle Lines. Disney Nature Chimpanzee and Disney Nature Monkey Kingdom. Gordon Ramsay, Uncharted, as Logan mentioned, that we've already kind of taken a look at on one of these. And then the next couple were mentioned in that other one. Life Below 0 Degrees and Free Solo are a couple other recommendations here. And Women of Impact, Changing the World was the last one. And I'll also throw out there, again, the Imagineering story, specifically the Hit or Miss episode, talking about Animal Kingdom. In general, it has like a bunch of fascinating kind of characters that were also involved in the park. One of whom I think just recently retired, according to the like Disney Imagineering Instagram posts I follow. But yeah, it was a very cool story about how, in particular, about how Animal Kingdom kind of came out because it was maybe one of the first major park ideas that launched post Walt. Because Walt Disney World was still very much like his baby, his idea, even if he didn't like live to see it through to completion. So Animal Kingdom kind of coming in there was, we want to take the magic that he has instilled in everything, but we also like we're in the Everglades and we want to do something about animal conservationists. So so bringing in people like Jane Goodall to kind of like make sure they were on the right track for a lot of the stuff they were doing. And it is very much, it's like the idea they really touch on in there is like, it's not a zoo. It is, a fully like this, we've tried to recreate their environment and we've made it big enough that they can like live freely and roam freely, just like they would if they were in the Serengeti or wherever else. But still make elements, there for viewing and make it kind of a relationship between the audience, the park goers,
educational opportunity too,
and the animals. So yeah, definitely check that out as well. You watching anything else on Disney Plus there, Logan?
On Disney Plus, no. I still have to watch WandaVision, get around to it.
Did you ever watch The Mandalorian either?
Not season 2. No, that's a great point. I have some. We're so backlogged. We're watching the Psych.
Yeah, you're watching Psych. You're watching Temptation Island. Whatever, like all this other stuff that you're watching out there. Sure.
Yeah. But watching the Psych. Otherwise, on Disney Plus. No. Now that you mention it, I might check out the Taylor Swift documentary. Possibly. I think she's got one on Netflix too. For another one of her albums. But yeah. What about you?
I've been throwing on here and there episodes of The Muppet Show. I'm just kind of enjoying that.
Really?
Yeah, especially like I remember watching The Muppet Show a lot when I was growing up. I don't remember on what.
PBS probably, I guess.
Maybe, yeah. But yeah, like hopping in here. I mean, so far I've watched like 5 or 6 episodes, and it's fascinating because like obviously so many of them are built around like stars of the time, and like I know Joel Grey, who is one of the episodes I watched, and Rita Moreno. Like I know them, and I know both of them from like their theatrical work. Joel Grey, most recently, kind of like made a resurgence on Broadway as the Wizard in Wicked, and so he kind of he originated the role. I think he came in like last minute as like a replacement right before they went to Broadway, but whatever. He's on the soundtrack and stuff. But he had and it's very heavily alluded to in the Muppet Show episode, was that he was in Cabaret at the time, with I think Julie Andrews. So he's out there like singing Donkashane and like Welcome to the Kit Kat Club or whatever. Like he's singing he's singing like Cabaret, the theme from Cabaret. And so it's very fascinating kind of like seeing that, but then like other people are just like, so and so was big on Laugh-In, and I'm like, I obviously don't have that as a touchstone, or this person was a big dancer of the era or something like that. And so it's this interesting blend of like people that I kind of know because they've like stood the test of time, or people I have no idea who they are, what they are. But then there's also elements of like it might have been in the Joel Grey episode, but like the Mana song is one of the most iconic things that came out of the Muppet Show, and even before the Muppet Show, it's one of the most iconic things that came out of the Muppets in general. Is the Mana do 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 Mana do 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 do, like that number, which I've known and seen that number multiple times, especially because a friend of mine in college loved the Muppets and basically wanted to go work for the Jim Henson Company. That was kind of like one of her life goals was, and we did for her. Effectively her thesis, we did a big shadow puppet show where we took like a giant 30-foot wide by like 20-foot high cloth out in this area we called the Secret Garden, and we put on a show entirely in like shadow puppetry, but it was like live action shadow puppetry kind of stuff. Well, it was live action mixed with it's fascinating like piecing this together and then like seeing where some of these people have gone forward, because there was also like we used one of those like overhead projectors, and one of the people was great at animation and just basically like drew out a scene like on the overhead projector transparency as we were like acting it out. So like we're doing the scene and he's like building the landscape around us or whatever, and that's being projected on the white screen in front of us, and like the audience is seeing that. And so that was like a cool element as well. And I'm just realizing like that guy has gone on to work on like Robot Chicken and like all sorts of like stop motion.
Never had talented friends.
Pieces and work since then. Yeah. I think he might have even like, it is entirely possible there's a stop motion / claymation like commercial in one of the episodes of WandaVision. It's entirely possible he worked on that because he's like just one of those people in the industry these days, and that was really cool. Johnny McCone is that guy.
Johnny McCone, shout out
to Johnny McCone, who has done a ton of stuff, especially for like Adult Swim kind of animated shows. Like just like having this weird flashback of like I haven't thought about that in probably 10 years,
15 years, yeah.
But yeah, Mana indeed.
That's stuck in my head now.
There you go. Like I've been it's been fun to sit in and check out just the Muppet Show stuff. I have somebody I kind of want to I might want to try and reach out to, because I think the guy that runs like the Muppet History like Twitter feed, which is like a big fan run thing celebrating the Muppets, and has a ton of kind of traction and coverage. I'm pretty sure like he and I have been like Facebook friends for years, so I'm pretty sure he was like someone in the Kind of Funny community in the early days, and then just something that he's done. So I might want to try and like reach out to him and be like, "Hey, you want to come on
You wanna do the Muppet Show?
on that Disney Plus show and
He'd have
talk
his
about
own
the Muppets?"
thing of trivia, probably.
Oh,
yeah.
absolutely. I have no doubt. He would blow me away because, again, that's like what his entire, I mean, like his
MO is,
entire
yeah.
Twitter presence is basically Muppet trivia. So, yeah, that's something that I've like flirted with the idea of like reaching out to him about bringing him on. But yeah, that's pretty much what I've been watching on Disney Plus in particular. By the time this episode goes live, i.e. tomorrow morning, I will have probably already engulfed the like behind the scenes making of WandaVision thing. So I'm looking very forward to that. But like if not, that's the next thing I plan on watching. And I'm also tempted to watch Raya and the Last Dragon, which is in like premium access right now.
Too. That's the reason why I haven't. Shrav really wants to watch him. Like, it's just such a. I hate that they do that like that.
Yeah, it's the fact that you have to drop the extra $30. And so I was never going to do it for Mulan, especially when like Mulan came out to very like lukewarm like reception. But like I clearly have a lot of friends that have done it for this one and have been like gushing about it. So I'm tempted to maybe sit down and maybe drop the $30 on that this weekend, especially since George or Jarrett, one of them, threw shade my way last weekend when I dropped $50 for an AEW wrestling show.
It was George.
pay-per-view,
Yeah, I remember this. Yeah.
where I was like, yeah, because there was a moment even when I'm like putting in my credit card information to Bleacher Report to watch that, where I'm like, why am I fine doing this but not dropping an extra $30 to watch Raya? I guess part of it, like it's largely I already pay a monthly subscription fee for Disney Plus, so just give me the things that you're putting on Disney Plus.
Yeah.
But whatever. Because obviously I would have gone. I like if it had been in theaters. I guess it was in theaters. If it were safe to go to theaters, I would have seen it opening weekend, just like I did with like Onward a year ago or whatever.
Wouldn't have done that,
But yeah. And actually, I found out like it actually wasn't playing in a lot of theaters near me because a couple of the bigger like nationwide chains refused to put it out there because Disney wanted like too big of a split in the revenue share. So they were just like, no, we're just not going to do it. Like, there's no point in us putting your movie in if we're not going to keep more of the revenue, because it's already like we're already dying as it is.
Yeah.
Like, don't bust our backs and do that. So, like, like I was seeing something like that's why it didn't do as well at the box office as maybe some people had projected it would, was because like Harkins, which is kind of the big local chain here in Arizona, as well as like some of the other Southwest states. It might be out there in Texas too at this point. But Harkins is like the 5th largest chain in the country. They weren't doing they didn't have it. Cinemark didn't have Raya. And then like one of the other ones is like still closed. So it's like 3 of the top 5 chains in the US were not showing Raya and the Last Dragon. So maybe that's why more people were like, yeah, fine, I'll just sit down and watch it on Disney Plus.
Disney Plus.
But yeah, that's like what I'm tentatively going to watch in the coming future. But yeah, that is going to do it for this week's episode of That D Plus Show. Thank you, Logan, for joining me to talk about Jane. You can follow Logan at Lefty Logie. Anything you want to give a shout out to, Logan?
Shout out to Jane Goodall. Audrey. And then otherwise, shout out to all the great content over at That Nerdy Site. And in particular, I'll give a shout out to That D Plus Show in general. It's a lot of fun, and Trevor does a lot of good stuff over here with it.
Thank you. Yeah, last week in particular was a definitely a fun one to bring on. We had Josh Silverman, we had Mario Rivera, came on and joined Frank, myself, and Cameron. So we had a big old 5-person supersized show, as I touched on earlier in the episode, talking about all things WandaVision. Now that series has wrapped up, and that was just a ton of fun. Bringing on those guys and just really in general getting to talk to other people about WandaVision, which has very much been like I've been consuming so much other stuff around that show that being able to kind of like actually talk to other people and like spitball our theories and stuff like that was a ton of fun. So yeah, definitely check out That D Plus Show. And I will also check out this week's Let's Plays up on the channel, where I've been playing Stronghold Warlords, new real-time strategy game that came out this week to Steam. The team behind the game were kind enough to kind of give me an advanced code, so have spent a little time, put a little time into that game. I talked on one of our podcasts when we were talking about it. I was like, yeah, and it doesn't have like difficulty settings. And then like that night, I think I went back in and played and found the difficulty settings. So it does have difficulty settings. And I just had not caught where they were in the game. But yeah, I've been having some fun with that. And I think they're at least like fun Let's Plays, even if I'm really bad at the real-time strategy. So yeah, go check those out as well. You can follow all of us over at That Nerdy Site. If you liked what you heard, once again, please like, rate, review, subscribe, share the podcast with your friends, all that fun stuff. And if you do feel so inclined, you can always support us on Patreon at patreon.com/thatnerdysite. Thank you for joining us. As always, stay nerdy, be good to each other, and class dismissed.